Hi, my name's Phil. I like talking about politics. In this video, I'd like to discuss the trap that the Tories and their client media have made for themselves over the summer holiday chaos that's already begun with problems in getting passports sorted out, but the large-scale cancellation of flights particularly newsworthy right now. Can't blame COVID, won't blame Brexit. So what do? Blame everyone else and do nothing, of course. But first, if you'd like to be notified of daily news and politics, please subscribe to the channel and click the bell notification icon. So we seem to be having another dose of travel chaos. People who had been planning getaways, having their flights cancelled, and with them their holidays. People have been stuck at airports, which surely is always the hellish part of any foreign travel, even without delays. Then you imagine you have extra delays because there's problems, and then at the end of it, you're told to go home because your holiday's cancelled. The problems have been blamed on staff absences. Now, let's see here. What could cause a sudden increase in staff absences? Might it be COVID infections sweeping through a workforce that has to work largely indoors with large groups of people that have come from all over the country not wearing face masks? And might that infection rate increase when there is an increase in the number of people being jammed together like, I don't know, in a summer holiday season? In this case, the half-term break. And with so many people understandably angry at the situation, government ministers were bound to be asked what's going on in interviews. Now, some people have pointed to Brexit issues, and certainly they exist, due to the extra hassle now in dealing with passport control, which did not exist before we left the customs union single market, nor would it have. It can take a lot longer to get people on their flights. And this issue has already meant people missing their flights and knackering their holidays, and it'll do it again. But that is not the cause of disproportionate staff absences. Also has to be said, there have been similar staffing issues leading to cancellation of flights in Ireland, the Netherlands, the United States, I gather. So surely the government could just point out, look, risks of COVID, especially in indoor areas where you've got lots of people jammed together in a relatively small space. They could note that this is a particular problem for staff who will constantly be surrounded at close quarters by people from all over the country and at risk of infection. But of course they can't do that, because although the government aren't pretending that COVID has gone away as such, they are pretending that we need do nothing about it. They claim it's endemic. They say, it's one of those things. Yeah, it's about, you might catch it now and then, but we should do nothing about it, like cold or flu. But it's not endemic. Epidemiologists have been warning about the folly of a government strategy that involves sticking our heads in the sand. In fact, as a little aside, there was no small measure of dismay recently from experts at a Norfolk County Council advice poster that told people to keep cleaning their hands to ward off COVID. Are you having a chuckle, the expert said? Cleaning your hands to ward off an infectious airborne disease. And this has been said a lot in the past. If you don't face up to the realities of a problem, whatever that problem is, you will not apply the correct solutions other than by accident. If you don't apply the correct solutions, the problem will not go away unless something else makes it go away. So you're basically trusting to luck. So back to the government. They can't really blame COVID and reapply some sensible measures like saying, well, what you should probably do is wear face masks here in these areas because they're now committed to pretending there's no need for special precautions. Even though very simple measures like this would save thousands of holidays for people who had already been through enough. But they won't do it because their politics is insane. And the last thing you want running the government is in a crisis is someone with insane politics. But that's what we've got. So what do ministers and their Tory media do? Can't blame COVID. Actually, in the interest of fairness, I am going to point out that I did see one government minister pointing to COVID as a cause. Arts Minister, Junior Minister Stephen Parkinson did suggest that the cause was a COVID surge, but this is not something really being echoed in the more widely reported interviews. They want to avoid talking about COVID wherever possible. Can't blame Brexit either, obviously, even when Brexit is responsible. And Brexit is going to be a big problem again for holidays later this year. But that's fine. They'll blame that on the French. So they're blaming the travel companies. But how do you blame the travel companies for suddenly being short-staffed? Well, Transport Secretary Grant Shapps tried to say that these companies had oversold flights and holidays. However, that doesn't make sense, because if this was the cause, yes, you would see individual holidaymakers left grounded, but the flights would still have taken off. What we're talking about here are flights being cancelled. So that's an obvious lie. So back to the Arts Minister, who actually referred to COVID. He still used it to blame companies though, as did Shapps on the sly. He said that they should have known there would be an upsurge in COVID cases and have been better prepared. Now, I do feel this would have more credibility if the government were making these warnings very public. If the government had been really clear to expect an upsurge in cases, especially in the tourism industry at peak times, they may have had more justification for the complaint. I would still argue that prevention is better than cure, and that government measures to avoid the surge would have been preferable. But that is not a government that takes responsibility for anything. But the government haven't been warning of this. Government scientific advisors have, but not many are still following what they say without the minister-led press conferences. Like we used to have them once a day. Now, obviously, we don't need them once a day now, but we don't have them at all. You would think once a month to update people, but no. I saw another minister suggesting that Brexit freedoms had allowed companies to hire staff more quickly. So, they should have been able to do so. It's like, well, when they had these staffing problems, we've put the things in place to let them hire staff really quickly. Now, I'm not entirely sure what this one is about. As usual, as far as I could tell, they weren't asked for follow-up details and they didn't offer any themselves. But I will say that, interestingly, the trade body for airlines says that there have been extra delays in clearing staff for work. So they haven't found it that it's quicker to hire staff. Actually, it's taken a lot longer. It said the time it's taken for security clearance for new staff has trebled. This means it's sometimes taking 3 months to get new staff cleared to work, which is, of course, putting off a lot of potential new employees. And once you've got that security clearance, after 3 months at the moment, the staff then need training. So they say they can't do the training before that clearance, according to the group. The Department for Transport complain that they have been urging companies to hire more staff months ago. My response to this would be threefold. Were I interviewing the Transport Minister, I would say first, it's all right saying you urged them months ago. It's taking many months to be able to hire staff because of the time needed for security clearance and training. So staff accepted for a role months ago, when you say you were urging companies to do this, are still not ready now. It still wouldn't have helped. Second, companies are always reluctant to take on new staff unless they are sure they will need them. Private company doesn't like to have a load of staff sat around. And this is the model that the Conservative government keeps demonstrating. And it's doing it again with its 20% cuts to the civil service. Companies don't want to spend money on overhiring. They'd rather wait until they know what their staffing needs will be. The Tory government cannot complain about the inevitable consequences of free market forces at work any more than a person who jumps out of a plane without a parachute can complain about gravity. And third, the government could have taken simple steps to have reduced the level of staff absences with measures that would not represent a restriction on how people live their lives. Face masks in indoor locations, going back to a more robust testing regime, having a proper track and trace in place, not that £37 billion disaster, a much cheaper version like other countries that actually worked. All of these things would have allowed people full freedoms in the pursuit of their activities, but also kept the rate of infection down. But no, the government just want to blame everyone but themselves. But this is always my conclusion to such behaviour. Blaming others doesn't help. The most liberating time of my life is when I came to the conclusion that I had the power to influence my own future. I would argue that I always used to take responsibility for my own actions. If I messed up, I would say so, and I would try and clear up the mess. But I wouldn't be very happy if I got screwed over by someone else. If it was someone else's fault, I would chunter away at the fact I was having to suffer from someone else. Then one day I realised that even if something was someone else's fault, if I am suffering from it, I can deal with it. It would be better for me if I just did that. Doesn't matter whose fault it is. Can I do something about it? Yes, do it. We need a government like that. A government that sees a problem and fixes it. Doesn't matter whether it's their fault or someone else's. Waste of time worrying about blame. Worry about the problem instead. Afterwards, if you think someone was to blame, then maybe you think about regulations to make it less likely someone can do that in the future. But in the interim, you've got a problem. What is the solution? But what we have is a government that never looks at solutions for a problem, even when the problem is their fault. They only ever look for blame. Vote me a large majority, Boris Johnson said, then I'll have the power to make everything right. Well, he got his majority, a big one. But ever since, his government has been a catalogue of blame. If a government with close to an 80-seat majority is powerless to make our lives better, they should stand aside for others. But those are my thoughts. Let me know yours in the comments below. I hope you found the video interesting. If you did, please click the like button. Maybe even click on the join button if you'd be interested in memberships. And until next time, I'll see you later.